What's going on? Today I'm going to talk about Lua programming language, specifically or particularly the vulnerabilities that come with using this language when building web applications. So basically, as per the official website, the definition of Lua is a powerful, efficient, lightweight, embeddable scripting language. It supports procedural programming, object-oriented programming, functional programming, data-driven programming, and data description. Technically, Lua can be used the same way PHP is used in building web applications. So in this video, this video will not be a tutorial about learning Lua. Okay, in this video, I'm going to be talking about the various web application vulnerabilities that come when you use Lua insecurely in building web applications. Then I'm going to take an example from HackTheBox that demonstrates the code injection in Lua and then carry over. So I'm going to drag this to the right. So this video assumes that you know the basics of Lua programming. So I'm going to switch on to my editor here, and I'm going to start talking about the vulnerabilities. The first vulnerability is cross-site scripting. Much like PHP or another programming language, there is XSS. So here is an example vulnerable code in Lua that is vulnerable to cross-site scripting. So what are all of these, right? So basically the handle and it is used in Apache. So when you use Lua in building a web application with Apache, basically you use the handle. So puts also is a print function when you integrate Lua with Apache. So what's wrong here? Or what does the code do? So basically, it's just taking a parameter from the user. The parameter name or the variable name is vulnerable. It is taking an input from the user and print it out of the screen. So the vulnerability here is the input is taken from the user, okay, stored in the variable name called vulnerable and directly used in the print function. So an example exploitation of that is if you have a URL example.com and you have a parameter called vulnerable, which is used in the code here. Now, normally, vulnerable or the variable here is supposed to do something or supposed to display something at the page. So vulnerable equal, for example, 1, 2, 3. And instead of that, you would use a simple basic Xss payload to see if the code is vulnerable. Now, if the code or if the backend code is like that, there is no input sanitization between the user inputs and the print out, you can deduce that the code is vulnerable to cross-site scripting. So here, output and our write used for printing, and this code uses mode Lua for the Apache. So that's the first demonstration, okay, of code in Lua vulnerable to cross-site scripting. So how do you patch this code? All you have to do is to implement between the stage of user input and the stage of printing that input or using that input in your code is to use input sanitization techniques like HTML. An example is HTML escape. So there are many techniques that you can use to validate the input. Now the next vulnerability is Sql Injection Exploits. It can be used with Lua. So what's an example vulnerable code? So a vulnerable code example is right here. So before explaining the vulnerable code, let's take a look at the basics. So Lua, to connect to our SQL server, Lua uses a module called Lua SQL. Lua SQL is used to connect to a SQL database. Technically, you would issue the variable that contains the SQL connection parameters and then execute. That's how you connect and execute queries on the backends. Or you would use the mode Lua deep database API. An example is database query, where the query holds the parameters that connect to the database. Now, these are the basics. So an example you would see in the real world is an example.com/lua vulnerable equal test. So much like the same example, here we have a URL, okay, that has a parameter which serves something. Now, the vulnerable is supposed to serve something that displays something on the display an output to the user, right, on the page. So instead, let's say the value is test. So you would put single quotes, parentheses, and here we have colon, semicolon. With the semicolon, you put your SQL command. What is the basis of that? So if you get back to the code, the vulnerable code. Now, here you would put the SQL command. For example, you would dump the entries of a specific table. You would create a table. You would um, um, do whatever you want. So an example vulnerable code is this one. So here, as you can see, it is using the handle from Apache, and here the username. Actually, it is the user. It is the input that we use in this case. So basically, here you're supposed to put username. Okay, let's say for example, username equal admin, right? So the input is taken from the user, stored in the username, and then we put the database connection parameters, MySQL, the host, the user, and the path, and we store them in database. And if there is no error, basically, we will execute this query. Okay, now the problem is this query takes the input, right, by the inputs from the user, which is here, and directly use that input in a variable name called vulnerable. I named this on purpose just to demonstrate where is the problem in the code. Now, immediately we use the API, ModeLua DP API, to connect and query the database. So vulnerable holds the query and R holds the database connection parameters. Now the problem is here. Okay, I am using a variable taken directly from the user and using that variable immediately in the query, which would create a problem. So whatever I put here, admin, and after the column, I would execute another command. Whatever I put here, it will be taken directly here and executed against the database. That's sample vulnerable code to SQL injection. Now we would test this with a URL that has a formula similar to this one. For XSS, you would test it on a URL that has a similar formula to this one. Okay, let's talk about now file system attacks, where you would access vulnerable or you would access sensitive files. So an example would be the same example, right? We have a web page that's using Lua, and we have a parameter that's supposed to print out something with a screen. And here, the variable name or the parameter is used to display a file or display file content. So in this case, let's say it's supposed to list user.txt, right? Okay, that's the function of the variable in a regular scenario. Now, basically for file system functions, Lua uses IO library, input-output, to communicate with the file system. An example is io.open, which used to open the file. Let's go to a vulnerable code and see what we can do here. So we have this vulnerable code works on NGX server. Now, here we get a user input, and we store it in a variable name called vulnerable, right? The user input is actually file. So if you want to access something on the web server, file name on the server, you would just pass the file name. So here, in my example, I would use user.txt. And then the user input is stored at the vulnerable variable. Then we would use the Lua IO library to open the file name and append the .txt extension. Then we would read the file name and close the connection. So basically, the problem here is I take the user input file, okay, and use that input directly in the IO open and append.txt. The problem here is if you put the null byte after the file name, it will ignore everything that comes after the null byte. What do I mean by this? For example, if I use a variable name called, or if the file name that I would like to pass was etc pass wt, okay, and if I append null bytes right after pass wt, then this is the value that is passed to this line of code here. So appending.txt will not do anything. Why? Because the null byte will just terminate everything that comes after it. So that's why it's called the string terminator. So everything that comes after the null byte, it will be ignored by the code. That's why the .txt will be ignored, and there will be no any text file displayed back to the user. What will be displayed back instead is the etc password. That's why before using the vulnerable directly in the system call, we would here insert something to filter for such characters. Okay. Now the third vulnerability is local file inclusion. Now an ideal scenario is similar to this one. You would access sensitive file on the system and you would use the string terminator. So the vulnerable code is like this. So it takes the user input. Now CGI Lua is module you would install it in your environment where you have the Lua implementation, and it will handle the CGI applications or CGI operations. If you have CGI web application, you will use CGI Lua to take the user input and other operations in your code. So here we take the user input, store it in variable, and then we would do the same. Do if, much like include in PHP, and call the file. So if we put string terminator, it will ignore that.txt, and here we have local file inclusion. Now lastly, the code injection. An example would be is an example.com Lua vulnerable, and we have a parameter that we are supposed to pass as the input. Instead, we put single quotes to induce an error, and we have a parenthesis column to execute another command, and we would execute system command. Now OS.execute is the system call used in Lua to execute system commands. Instead of system command, we would execute here reversal. Put semicolon and dash dash to comment out everything that comes after that. Now, what has caused this? Technically, in the backend code, load string is used without validation. Now, if you use load string in Lua without sanitizing the HTML that contains a user input element, which is vulnerable in this case, the name is vulnerable. In this case, load string will load it immediately without any mitigation, without any validation. That's the problem. Now let's talk about the mitigations. The mitigations here, as you can see, we would use HTML escape and here put the variable that contains user input, and we would use the files match directive in Apache and PCRA strings. You would just Google these to find more details about what do they mean. They're not covered in the scope of this video. Now we're going to jump to the practical scenario. The practical scenario is a machine from HackTheBox. The machine name is Luanne, which is the latest retired machine. And we will see how this applies in the real world. Not real world, practically. Okay. So first we connect to the VPN network, and then we would issue nmap scan -a IP address is 10.10.10.2.1.18. So now we would scan the machine and reveal the open ports. But we know beforehand that the machine has port 80 open. Let's go directly and apply what we learned about the Lua vulnerabilities. 10, 10, 10, 10, 218 is requesting your username and password. The site says dot. Okay, so here we have basic authentication, and we have here something. It says that the local machine is listening on port 3000, and we're not authorized to access the current page. So maybe we would have to try to brute force something in this page or other directories. Let's see if robots.txt has something. Robots. User agent disallow weather returning 404 but still harvesting cities. Okay, slash weather. 404 not found. All right. So it seems that we need to just directory search the web server. So basically what we would do here, we would just new handle sudo go cluster dir-u. Okay, now the word list dash w user here. Okay. Directory listing. Okay, so okay, so long story short, I'm gonna skip this and go right to the point. So here you will find directory called forecast. And once you access this, you'll receive a message saying no city specified, use city list to list available cities. So here if you say city equal list, so now you will get the list of cities: London, Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds, etc. So what we're supposed to do here now, as you can see, we have question mark city equal list. We have a parameter supposed to serve something, which is serving something, which is listing the cities. Now we would like to manipulate this parameter and use the single quote or tag. See what it does. So we have here Lua error or JSON. Syntax error, JSON parse, unexpected line. Okay, instead of list, oh, come on, no. So list, single quote. I remember I received a Lua error, so I think I will have to okay, let's intercept the request with perp suite. So intercept is on, send the request. Let's see here. Okay, intercept the response. So that's what I was talking about. Lua error. User local logged API weather.lua 49 attempts to call uh, and whatsoever. Okay, so we have a file called weather.lua which is serving this page. So the file cannot or couldn't serve what we just sent. That's why it has thrown an error. So basically, this would resemble the scenario we have encountered or I have talked about earlier in the video when I mentioned the vulnerabilities. So once we receive or once an error is printed out of the screen, it means that it is worth trying to discover if there is a vulnerability. So forward. Okay. So here, let's get back. So we have possible vulnerabilities in this case, XSS, SQL, whatsoever. So let's try a simple Xss payload, see how it's going to work. Copy that. And here I would just, instead of list, I would type this one and see if it's going to work. Forward. So this is not vulnerable. Maybe we would try list. Okay, what about this one? Okay, so XSS didn't work. Let's see SQL. Maybe we'll put SQL at the last. Now here we cannot try file system attacks on this in this scenario because the parameter here is not calling or is not using system calls. So we can try code injection or command injection. All right, so we use the os.execute to try this. So basically, get back here, os.execute. In this example, I will use ID just as a test. Let's see here. Intercept response. So unknown city. So here we have. Here we got the ID, which means that the command injection has succeeded. So the code or the website is vulnerable to Lua code injection. Forward, you would receive the same. No, it hasn't been printed out of the screen, but we have been able to see it with Perp Suite. So what we would do here to fully execute, to fully exploit this vulnerability, we would just put some reversal between or put it here as a command. So let's go and find something. So maybe okay. So now let's just turn the settings back to their original state. So payload, all the things. Let's see. I'm not sure this is the correct page I'm record. Reverse shell. Okay, so let's use something. Netcut, maybe netcut will work. Okay, let's take this one. Of course, change the parameters. So here we would replace the ID with the command. Here the IP and the ports, we're supposed to change them. So if config, I am 14.5. Before executing this, we will have to open the listener. So close that. Let's see. os.execute rm. Well, this doesn't work. So normally when this happens, we will have to think of another way. So basically, one way is to convert the payload into a URL encoded form. So what we did here is os.execute. Okay, so here is the payload, and then semicolon dash dash. So here is the payload. Now let's go to perp suite, paste the payload, and take the URL form. So let's copy that and paste it somewhere here. Right now, I think. Okay, maybe let's see if we. Oh, there's also execute here. So remove this one. Okay, let's take these now. I think I messed up the command. Okay. So here it is. Okay, close the parentheses, semicolon dash dash, enter, check it out, and we receive the reversal. So that is the full exploitation of Lua code injection vulnerability, as we demonstrated earlier in the theoretical part. Now here, I'm not sure if I wanted to go on. There are many walkthroughs on this challenge, but I just wanted to demonstrate the scenarios of exploiting Lua vulnerabilities in web applications. Now we can just proceed and go on. So type my ID HTTPD EWD. We are in var ls index robot.txt. So we can just go one directory before ls no cd cd home r.michaels cd var ls two files ls.a three files. So I have password file. I'm not sure why there is a password file here. So cat.htpass.wd. So we have a password hash. Just take it and use hashcat. So first, put these in a file. Hash. Okay, sudo john word list equal. The password is I am the best. Now this password is supposed to be used somewhere. So maybe this password, we can use this to access the main web server. we tried to access before, but we were denied access because it required an authentication. So here, let's use the API user. I am the best. So we have page, list available cities, 5-day forecast, weather forecast city equal London. Let's see this one. I think it's the same if we send out something here. If we try to find if this page is also vulnerable or the code behind this page is vulnerable to Lua injection, we can try the same payload here. So, and invoke another reversal. So maybe here we can clear sudo rl wrap nc.ltp 4546. Go back here, change the port to 6. Okay. Now London os.execute the payload is and semicolon dash dash with the work, right? We didn't encode the payload, I see. Or remove this part. Just remove this part. Let me check out the beginning of the payload. So it starts with, okay. I'm not sure why this is being loaded every time. Cancel. Let's close that. Let's see. So it didn't work on the London, it worked on the list. So, okay, let's get back. So we can't see to our Michaels. We'll have to find something else to avoid getting into a rabbit hole. So there was an open port on this IP, which was 3001. If you try to access that, we cannot connect. So maybe we have to just access this only from within the machine. So I would use curl localhost 3001. So what we received is unauthorized response. So maybe we have to provide the username and password we have just cracked. So curl specify username or credentials in curl, we would type dash dash user and the pair of credentials web API user I am the best local host 3001. Let's see. So we have a typo here. Let's repeat the command, localhost. So we get the same output we have received when we browsed on port 80. We have a weather page with a city equal list and another weather page with a city equal London. Okay. So here we know beforehand that the city equal list, or the code behind that, this the parameter, the code that serve it, oh my god. So we know beforehand that this page was, the code behind this page was vulnerable to Lua injection, right? Or the file handler. So we can just use that to access private keys, private SSH keys. So an example would be localhost 3001 slash weather slash forecast city equal list. And here we would pass the file that we would like to access. And then we put null parameters. So in this case, we are interested in accessing the SSH keys of R. Michaels. So R dot slash ID RSA, and we put null bytes. Let's see if this works. Nope, do work. Okay, exit. Oh, we were being kicked out. Yes. Okay, so where we were. So this one didn't work. Let's see if we can take this one more time and say semicolon slash didn't work. So let's try, if we remove this one, try to access the directory immediately without just the weather page forecast whatsoever. And here, not found. Not found. This item has been found, has not been found. Okay, let's copy the command and one more time. No. Okay, paste. Oh, I will receive the private key. All right. So let's take this private key and access the user with SSH. So u ID RSA. Okay, sh r dot Michaels at 10 10 10 218. Yes. Permission denied. Oh, dash I ID RSA. We forgot to specify the private key. Again, permission denied. cd home. All right. What was wrong here? Dash I ID RSA. Yes. Okay, now we got access. So with this private key, we were able to have SSH access to another user. As you can see now, the prompt has changed, or the shell has changed. Now where we are, ls/a. So this is the user flag. Let's go to backups. We have a backup file encrypted. File devel. Okay, so this is an encrypted file. We can decrypt the file with net GPG. So net GPG dash dash. Decrypt, specify the file name. And dash dash output the file, or the output, or the path where the output file is supposed to be. Let's say intent to avoid permission denied errors, and put something like Lua star gz. So here it is not GPG, it's PGP. So they confuse them. So PGP. Okay, cd temp. We have a tar file. Now all you have to do is just to untar this file. So tar dash xzdf and the file name. What was the file name? Lua. And we have other password file. So ls cat. No, just wait. So these files were extracted to these directories. So go to devel .cat ht passwords, and we have another password. Let's take that and crack it. You sudo nano hash2 sudo john hash2, and the password was revealed, which is little beer. So this password could be used to access the root user finally. Why? If we issue cat etc fastwd, no such file or directory. How about here? Not. Okay. So what do we have here in the list? NGX, Michaels, nobody. So the only users that we can access are these, of course, in addition to the root user. So now let's escalate to root. Sudo su root. You are not listed in the correct secondary group to su root. Sudo su root. Sudo not found. So in sudo not found, use DOS su, and the password is, let's see, ID and you are the root user. So that was it. Technically, the challenge is kinda everything before the Lua exploitation is something that you can use in the real world, but everything that comes after the Lua exploitation, once we got the first foothold, everything that comes after is kind of CTF, right? CTF style. You just have to guess. So that was about this video. I hope you like it and see you in the next video.